what it is about at the end of the day is putting all the science on the table, and everyone's science, be that South Africa, Europe, and other trading partners, and for an independent body to adjudicate, well, who's right and who's not, or who's more right, because things are not always black and white, but on balance, what is a proportionate measure? So it's like if you're a lawyer and you're going to defend somebody that you know is guilty of murder, you might do that as a lawyerly duty, but you're not going to do it with passion. In this case, I think South Africa is right, and so that gives you energy. Don't consider it like a hostile act, neither on the European side or on this side. It's simply a mechanism to resolve a case that is not resolvable on a bilateral basis, and that's all it should be.
I know they've tried to do this for a long time, and it's not the last resort, but actually it pretty much is. They had to go there. They tried everything else. So we're really, really hoping for a positive outcome for South Africa.
I was talking about subsidies earlier, and it's true that small farmers in Europe struggle despite the subsidies, but, well, I mean, South African farmers don't have any subsidies.
There's no subsidy.
There's absolutely none. So that's where there is a disconnect in terms of perception.
Yeah, previously we've had an interview with somebody from the Europe as well. It was last year, and the question I had is, I think that do you think that the policymakers in Europe have a disconnect with the people on the ground? And I think you've just answered that they do not know how it is where it's being produced.
Good afternoon, Rocco. It's really nice to have you join us. Rocco Renaldi has been the CGA representative in Brussels since 2007, so nearly 20 years. So it would be lovely to hear from you what you've been doing on behalf of the South African citrus industry over time, and tell us more.
Thank you for having me. So I started work indeed for CGA back in 2007. Justin Chadwick came to me alongside Vaughan Hatting of CRI to talk about the black spot issue. So it's an issue that's been an issue since at least 1992, since the EU formed the common market and harmonized plant health legislation across the EU's member states. It was manageable until it became more of a priority for the EU, and the EU started clamping down and regulating more. So I have been dealing basically with that issue throughout these years, and we've had peaks and troughs, and we've had more difficult times than others, but it's an issue that so far we've managed. And we effectively have managed to keep the market open and allowed the South African citrus growers to actually increase exports to Europe over these years, despite those difficulties.
So when Justin approached you back in 2007, have you had any dealings with agriculture or fruit production or anything of the sorts before then?
Yes, I'd had several years of work with the agri-food, different interests in the agri-food sector. So I was familiar with, let's say, not the specific issue, but let's say,
and I presume,
the theme. Yeah.
And I presume since then you've learned a hell of a lot.
I've learned a hell of a lot, yeah. I've been subjected to the Vaughan Hatting School of plant health science and and many other things in terms of the ins and outs of
Yes.
these issues.
I'm sure.
But currently you are the chairman for Edelman.
I'm chair for public affairs and government relations for Edelman. Yes.
Edelman.
Okay. And like you just said, Edelman is a PR firm.
Yeah, it's the world's largest communications firm. It's about 6,000 people worldwide.
Okay.
And public affairs is about 300 people. So the bulk of what Edelman does is corporate communications and brand marketing communications. Public affairs is more of a niche.
So that brings me to an important question, which has been discussed at the symposium. We're at the CGA symposium, or the CGA Citrus Summit. From a PR perspective and a brand perspective, what should countries, growers, industries do, excuse me, to better market our products? What would you, is there something that has crossed your mind that you thought, oh, this might be a good opportunity for that?
I mean, one thing that is expensive, but we heard it earlier. There was a presentation at the summit earlier from the lady that runs Stardust marketing agency, which was very convincing, compelling, I thought, in terms of, she titled it "Making Grapefruit Great Again." Right?
Okay.
Those sort of consumer campaigns that aim at building up the category in a market are, I believe, underused. The problem is they are expensive, and you have to sustain that expenditure over a long time. But this is what the big brands do, right? I mean, if you talk to a Coca-Cola or
Yes.
that sort of company, I mean, they're effectively marketing companies. 70% or whatever of what they do and what they are is about marketing. And that is what distinguishes a brand from a product or from a commodity, right? In
Yes.
terms of citrus, we call it a commodity.
Yes.
Yes.
Because citrus from my farm and from her farm and from your farm is just, it's the same fruit.
Well, it is until you differentiate it via branding and via communications, right? And a Ruby Summer Star grapefruit is different to another type of grapefruit, right? And I mean, it's not like the citrus industry doesn't do this; they do, but it's certainly, I think, an area that in the future could be looked at.
I think because we are in media, we create commercial videos and things for people. Like the 2 videos that was on screen now was produced by us. So I've been seeing this for a while, that the agricultural industry in whole is I think there's a gap in that market to get the message out there to the consumer, because I think the consumer just thinks about agriculture as pesticides and GMOs, which it's largely not that.
There's a lot of bad news about agriculture that buzzes around, and people don't get enough of the good news.
Yeah. But, you know, I think there's a shift underway, which is, and it was part of my talk earlier at the summit here. Europe really has now a farmers first agenda. Right? The last 5 years or longer, in effect, were all about making farming more sustainable from an environmental point of view. And I mean, obviously that's necessary too, right? You can't ignore the things like soil depletion, carbon emissions,
Yes.
biodiversity decline. You have to address those. But it was too black and white, and ignoring the fact that, you know, it's a self-defeating agenda unless you also address the issues of farmer income, of an affordable, a living wage, of dignity, and of generational renewal, which are all big problems in farming in Europe too, right? Because there's a real imbalance in terms of who gets the subsidies. The big farmers get way more, the small farmers don't. And so Europe has understood that now only after a series of significant farmer protests
Yes.
across Europe.
We all saw that.
With the rise, the connected rise of populist parties, because what do you do if nobody listens? You vote for the populist. I mean, that's what's been happening. I digress a little, but Edelman does a thing every year. It's called the Trust Barometer, right, which measures people's trust in institutions, right, in government, in the media, in NGOs, and in business across 29 countries. It's a large sample. What this year's barometer's headline is the crisis of grievance, and it's what's behind the election of Donald Trump in America and the rise of populism is people who basically feel aggrieved and don't have a hope of those grievances being addressed. And farming's been a big part of that in Europe, the farming community. So it's taken that much for politicians to listen. I think South Africa is a completely different context, right?
You're right.
But I think some of the challenges are the same, and some are not. But in some areas, the problem is that farming communities across continents are pitted effectively against each other. You know, with citrus, for instance, the South African citrus trade, to come back to that, the most vociferous opposition to this trade has been Spanish producers and their syndicates, right? Not all of them, but most of them. And what's behind it is a decline in that sector in Spain, right? They're losing competitiveness. It's a structural decline, right? Obviously, there's a genuine plant health issue if you talk about, for instance, FCM, right? False Codling moth is acknowledged as a concern, but the underlying sentiment is not driven by plant health. It's driven by impotence faced with structural decline. So it's for Europe to address that, not for South Africa.
But I do think that a lot of the things that happen in Europe and the US, and it filters down to us, because we are looking at those communities for so-called leadership as to how things should go. So I do think those kind of things do filter through to us on the ground in South Africa.
I think something you said, I was actually about to ask you a question, but you've answered part of it. So instead of it being a question, it'll be more like a statement that you see what you think about this. That sometimes phytosanitary issues are used as trade barriers.
Yes. I mean, that's a fact. Now, there's a lot of argument about the specifics, which one is and which one isn't being used or misused in that way. But it is a reality, and it's possibly subjective.
Yes.
So the only way to solve it, also because there are economic interests behind it, so the only way to solve it is actually through impartial adjudication. So, in the case of the citrus trade between South Africa and Europe, that's been taken to the World Trade Organization.
Yes.
I think that's the right way. Some in Europe will say, "Oh, you declared war on us, so that changes everything." I see it as just a legitimate recourse. And what it is about at the end of the day is putting all the science on the table, and everyone's science, be that South Africa, Europe, and other trading partners, and for an independent body to adjudicate, who's right and who's not, or who's more right, because things are not always black and white, but on balance, what is a proportionate measure?
So what we have gathered, and it would be interesting to hear your comment, what we've gathered is that the culmination of this World Trade Organization appeal has been coming for many years. Yes. The South Africans have tried to comply, tried to do what, and I'm sure you've been very involved from your side as well in this whole process. So it seems it's been long in coming. Is that the case?
Oh, it's been a decade in the making, at least. It's also not easy for a country like South Africa to take that step. I mean, it has repercussions, it has cost implications, and it's the first time South Africa does it. I think it's, like I said, the right step, but it shouldn't mar the wider relationship
Yes.
both between the countries and the grower communities. One of the things that I focused on my intervention here earlier was the fact that in the current geopolitical situation, there is a real case for Europe and South Africa to reinvigorate their relations. That is the intent of the high-level political delegation that is coming to Pretoria tomorrow, in fact. That is the plan. It's to say, well, in the face of adversity, friends should stand together. Now, in my view, it's perfectly possible if there is the political will to overcome these phytosanitary issues, which are, ultimately minor irritants
Yes.
in the bigger scheme. And so my appeal would be to our respective politicians to focus on that, rise above, and put your collective effort into resolving these trade issues, which are minor in the bigger scheme, but are really important for the sectors involved.
They are vitally important because it really has been it's been like a handbrake on our citrus industry for a while, and the handbrake's been biting deeper and deeper every year, and that's why they've been kind of pushed to do this now.
But that handbrake has been biting on ground level,
Yes.
on producer level.
That's what I
with
mean.
the spray programs, the things that they've got to put in place to mitigate these things. So that's where it's really biting.
Yeah, and it's biting into margins.
Yes.
And Europeans are not sufficiently aware of the imbalance. Right? I was talking about subsidies earlier, and it's true that small farmers in Europe struggle despite the subsidies. But, well, I mean, South African farmers don't have any subsidies.
There is no
Nothing.
subsidy.
There's
Yeah. No.
Absolutely none. So that's where there is a disconnect in terms of perception.
Previously we've had an interview with somebody from the Europe as well. It was last year, and the question I had is, I think that do you think that the policymakers in Europe have a disconnect with the people on the ground? And I think you've just answered that they do not know how it is where it's being produced.
Yeah, and it's even more the case if you think of a distant place,
Yes.
geographically distant, like South Africa, which is why it's important to organize exchanges, to bring, which is something that CGA has been doing brilliantly, to bring officials onto the ground, to keep up the diplomatic relations, to show people from Europe, the actual really high standards that are
In place, yeah.
in place. Yeah.
Could those policies be changed by the public in Europe if they had more knowledge? Like, let's say these PR campaigns would go out. Would a mass, I wouldn't call it an uprising, but could the pressure from the masses also cause this?
I think yes and no. I'll start with a no, because some of these issues are really obscure for the public. I mean, it's much easier for the South African public to be aware of, let's say, this black spot issue, because it affects South African producers and all the workers and the value chain. In Europe, well, the consumer buys oranges and they probably barely look at where they're from, or barely think that, hey, it's summertime, so these oranges are not European, and that's
Exactly.
Yeah, that's if they even knew that orange is a winter crop.
exactly, which is where, by the way, the brand building, brand South Africa building should come in. So to get consumer awareness of these sort of plant health issues is nigh on impossible. But could awareness in Europe be increased in a way that is useful to solve these issues? Probably yes. South Africa has a lot of positive associations, right, in the minds of Europeans. Europeans have used to sympathize with South Africa under apartheid, right, with South Africans and with that plight. There are a lot of cultural connections, South African cultural heritage, and
European.
The perception of that is thoroughly positive. Now, I think the communication that will help in this context is not a citrus specific or a plant health specific or anything like communication or anything like that. It's more of a brand South Africa.
Okay, interesting.
Because if you want to solve these, you will not really solve these issues probably unless they are solved at the top political level. And the top political level responds to a broader approach.
Okay, interesting.
Very interesting. You touched on something which I was thinking to ask you or to mention, is that we assume a lot of knowledge. And one of the things that is obvious is Spain is producing citrus at a different time of year to South Africa. So we are producing and sending citrus to Spain and the rest of Europe counter season. So when the Spanish citrus is kind of finished is when our citrus arrives in the market.
Yeah.
And I wonder what percentage of people actually are aware of that. So it's just an assumption. And the other interesting thing is that while we are exporting citrus to Europe, not very much of the citrus produced in Europe is ever exported to the Southern Hemisphere. It's the Southern Hemisphere is producing food for the Northern Hemisphere in the counter season and is exported to there. But there's very little traffic in the opposite direction.
Yeah.
So that's something that we know because we're involved in the industry, but that you shouldn't assume that knowledge. People on the ground, who are not involved in agriculture, aren't necessarily aware of this. And as you say, if they walk into the supermarket, last month they bought citrus, this month they're buying citrus, do they really stop and think about where it's coming from?
Yeah.
No, and that's, I mean, it's part of the whole the system, in the sense that ensuring continuity of supply throughout the seasons bolsters European production. Because if you take out, let's say, Southern Hemisphere fruit this year, you can be sure that winter demand in Europe next year will be lower, because consumers haven't been used to it through the year.
Okay.
So, in fact, the year-round trade reinforces the category in the market, full stop.
That makes sense.
And that's a fact.
So it brings us back to the protagonists in the complaining about South African, the phytosanitary things, people that are bringing the objections to South African access to Europe and the phytosanitary issues. Some of them are the Spanish people, and our citrus is actually there in the market to support theirs through the counter season. Yet this is happening. It's a bizarre situation.
Yeah,
I never thought about what he just said.
Yes, it's true.
It makes 100% sense.
If the stuff disappears, after a while people get used to it being
out of
gone.
sight, out of
and
mind.
then they go for something else.
Yeah, but there's another dimension which is equally important, which is this year-round trade sustains the packaging houses, the pack houses, the logistics chain in Europe. Right? I mean, a lot of the most efficient operations in that sense are actually in Spain, which is part of the reason why Spain is an attractive destination for South African fruit, because it's a very efficient, effective business that they run. So it's full of contradictions.
So we can't ask you which way you think the WTO appeal will go. Obviously not, but if you look at the possible outcomes and where have you got any comment on how things might go either way?
Look, I will say that it's not a rapid process, right? And especially now, well, already for several years, the WTO has been hampered by the United States, and so it's been actually, the appellate body has been blocked. With the new US administration, that is not going to improve. It doesn't mean the WTO cannot function, but I think it means we need to have patience and perseverance. And then it will rule one way or another.
Yes.
And what happens after that is, well, the losing side should comply. If it doesn't comply, it will face basically financial consequences, right? And now Europe, this is one of many cases that Europe faces, and it's the only case that South Africa has brought. So there's that imbalance, which I think needs to be reflected in a South African attitude, which is stick with it, is have faith in the process, and also don't consider it like a hostile act, neither on the European side or on this side. It's simply a mechanism to resolve a case that is not resolvable on a bilateral basis, and that's all it should be.
I know they've tried to do this for a long time, and it's not the last resort, but actually it pretty much is. They had to go there. They tried everything else. So we're really, really hoping for a positive outcome for South Africa.
When you go to a dinner party or you meet new people and you tell them what you do, how do you explain it, and what is their reaction when you tell them these issues that you're working on?
Well, generally, I don't say I'm a lobbyist. People look at you like, okay, you're a dodgy guy that stands in a corridor and passes envelopes. So, I mean, there's still that association, right? The reality is, it's a very sophisticated, multifaceted sort of profession, and so I explain that I'm a public affairs consultant, and I explain what public affairs is, the different parts of it. If I talk about the Citrus Growers Association, I call it my favorite client.
Okay. Oh, that's nice.
And that's because it is. It's my smallest client, but it's also my favorite one because, we've been doing it for so long that there's so many personal relationships that are very valuable. But for many other reasons, and one of them is that the case is good, right? The case is strong. So it's like if you're a lawyer and you're going to defend somebody that you know is guilty of murder, you might do that as a lawyerly duty, but you're not going to do it with passion. In this case, I think South Africa is right, and so that gives you energy.
It's fantastic. It's good. It's good to hear, and it's good that the passion came out and you said that. And I think it connects with something that I want to ask you, and that is, if you've been with the citrus industry since 2007, you must have seen this phenomenal growth.
Yes.
Through time from then. And I mean, what is your comment on having seen it grow like it is and seeing it going where it's going and that it's still growing? Must be quite something to observe.
It is. Look, I mean, it's testament to, I think, South African growers' entrepreneurialism, resilience, but also, the whole value chain's professionalism, and the work that the workers put in. But not least, it's also testament to the CGA, and I want to say a couple of words about that because it's a very strong, first of all, very strong model, right? Because whether you like it or not, you're going to pay a levy on each carton of oranges that you produce or of citrus that you produce. And that brings the industry together, and it creates a system that works for the growers. And it's from, paying people like me in terms of helping on market access, more importantly perhaps, funding CRI, development programs, transformation programs. All of that is possible because of that levy. And if you didn't have that, it would be so much weaker. And I think that's, a self-propelling dynamic, which is very positive. Then there's a question of leadership, right? And I do think that CGA under Justin has been under, a strong leadership. And I know many of the folks who are or have been over the years on the board, and they're all people with a vision and a mission. And if you put all those people together and you drive one agenda, you're going to succeed.
That's incredible. And I'm sitting here and my eyes falling to the right. Look at the slogan. Tough times don't last, but tough people do. To me, that is so, it's just summarized exactly what you've said. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the spirit. So
yes.
Whatever CGA does in the future, it needs to keep up that spirit.
Before you were involved with the CGA, did you have any other dealings with South African companies?
No, not companies. My wife, she's South African,
oh,
so
wow.
That's not a company, but
okay.
I have to deal with that.
She accompanies you every day,
Yes.
so you've got a lobbyist in the house with you. Okay,
That's interesting. That's
yeah.
interesting. And how did that transfer? How did you meet the South African wife?
Oh, in London.
Oh wow!
Where
Okay,
many
fascinating.
South Africans are. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's good to
Wonderful.
know that we are everywhere.
We certainly are.
Yeah.
Even advising some of the most powerful people in the world.
Apparently.
Rocco, I think we are coming to almost like to the end of the thing.
Yes.
We normally have a closing tradition where we ask one of the previous people we interviewed leaves a question that we ask to the next person.
Just makes it interesting.
And you're gonna give us a question as well. So let me just have a quick look here. 'Cause a lot of these are citrus related.
But it's been incredibly interesting to hear about what it must be like to be defending our industry and being in our corner in Europe. So pretty cool.
There's a question from one of the previous guests, and it's quite a deep question, and I thought you would have done this today, so I'm going to rephrase it a little bit. So the question is, what will you be doing today to better someone else's life? So is there anything that you've recently done or planning on doing to better somebody else's life?
I haven't thought about that today, but I think one thing is just through the profession, right? Is how you live your profession, right? And so this CGA case is a case in point where by doing what we do, we better people's lives, right? And there, I think what matters most is keeping the value chain going in a way that enables all those jobs to be kept and to increase. So to me, I'm a policy guy, so aside from good deeds in terms of donations or things like that, the way I look at it is what can you do at the systemic level, right, to improve people's chances. And so I think the thing I'll do is double down on my efforts to grow South African citrus.
Fantastic.
That's a very pragmatic and realistic answer.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.
you.
Appreciate your
You're
time.
welcome.
Thank you so much, and the best of luck with what you're doing, because it really matters.
Thank you.